Imagine a book written by a Christian minister back in 1952,
Right.
and it doesn't offer, like, a medical breakthrough or some kind of get-rich-quick financial scheme.
Nothing like that.
Yet somehow, this single volume stays on the New York Times bestseller list for a staggering 186 weeks.
Which is just wild.
It really is. I mean, it sells tens of millions of copies worldwide, and without anyone really realizing it at the time, it effectively births the entire multi-billion-dollar modern self-help industry.
Yeah, it fundamentally rewired how millions of people process their own daily thoughts. It basically took abstract theology and, turned it into an actionable daily psychological regimen.
Welcome to today's deep dive.
Yeah.
We are exploring the life, the philosophy, and the massive, surprisingly intense controversy surrounding Norman Vincent Peale and his iconic book, The Power of Positive Thinking.
And we've gathered a huge stack of sources for you today.
We really have. We're looking at chapter-by-chapter breakdowns of the book itself, biographical accounts of Peale, historical essays charting the rise of the self-help movement, and some fiercely intense critiques from prominent theologians and psychologists of his era.
So our mission today is to truly unpack the core techniques of Peale's philosophy. We are going to trace its surprisingly dark historical roots, examine its massive influence on business and politics, from Richard Nixon to Donald Trump, and understand exactly why it sparked such a severe backlash from the scientific and religious establishments of the time.
Right. But before we can really understand the controversy, we need to get into the actual mechanics of what Peale was preaching.
The nuts and bolts.
Exactly, because
Yeah.
reading through the chapter summaries, I mean, he wasn't just telling people to cheer up. He diagnosed what he saw as the greatest illness of the 20th century. He called it the inferiority complex. So what was his specific playbook for curing that?
Well, Peale observed that people were completely paralyzed by a deep-seated belief in their own inadequacy.
For sure.
So his solution was this highly structured blend of theology and mental conditioning. He taught that your physical and emotional reality is determined entirely by your thought life.
Okay.
And the hidden, self-sabotaging belief he really wanted to remove was the idea that you are a victim of circumstance. Because if you walk around thinking you're defeated, your subconscious mind will actually orchestrate your actions to manifest that defeat.
That makes sense. So how do you stop doing that?
To reverse it, he developed a core 3-step formula: prayerize, picturize, actualize.
Prayerize, picturize, actualize. Let's break down how that actually functions in practice, starting with that first one.
Yeah.
How does prayerizing differ from just, normal praying?
So traditional prayer often involves pleading with God for an outcome, right? Or confessing your shortcomings.
Yeah, asking for forgiveness, asking for help.
Exactly. But Peale shifted that entirely. Prayerize meant setting up a constant daily system of creative, affirmative prayer. You aren't begging for strength. You are confidently affirming that a divine, infinite power is already actively flowing into you at this very moment.
Wow.
Yeah, it's an aggressive claiming of energy rather than asking for a favor.
Which leads right into the second step. Picturize.
Yeah.
And the sources emphasize that this is the absolute linchpin of the whole system.
Oh, it's the crucial mechanism. You have to form an incredibly vivid mental picture of yourself succeeding.
So no casual daydreaming.
Right. You don't just idly hope for a good presentation at work or like a healthy relationship. You construct a detailed visualization and you stamp it indelibly on your mind. Peale insisted that you never permit that image to fade. And you absolutely never let the idea of failure enter your consciousness.
Because, from a psychological perspective, the mind seeks to complete whatever picture you feed it. If you feed it an image of failure, your subconscious will subtly alter your habits and choices to ensure you fail. You'll procrastinate, you'll hesitate.
Yeah, you'll sabotage yourself.
Right. But if you feed it success, you'll subconsciously move toward it.
And that psychological alignment is what creates the third step, which is actualize.
The final result.
Yep. That firm mental picture, backed by absolute faith, literally brings the desired outcome into material reality. But, and this is key, Peale knew this required rigorous maintenance.
Right. It's not a one-and-done thing.
No, not at all. He provided very specific, practical exercises in the book. One of the most famous is the practice of emptying the mind at least twice a day.
Okay, what does that look like?
He instructed readers to consciously visualize all their fears, resentments, and insecurities physically draining out of them, like water emptying from a basin.
But wait, If you are listening to this right now and thinking, wait, if I just empty my mind of all my worries, won't they just flood right back in 5 minutes later?
Yeah, that's a very fair question.
Yeah. You are touching on the exact problem the sources bring up. Because nature abhors a vacuum. An empty mind just invites the anxiety straight back in.
Well, Peale actually anticipated that. The second part of that exercise is immediately filling the newly emptied mind with positive, creative thoughts.
So you replace it right away.
Exactly. He told his readers they must deliberately and ruthlessly replace a negative thought the exact second it appears.
That sounds exhausting.
It was a lot of work. And to help with this, he prescribed repeating specific affirmations. His absolute favorite was Philippians 4:19, I can do all things through Christ.
Oh, okay.
He instructed readers to repeat that 10 times a day, out loud if possible. The goal was to drive it so deep into the subconscious that it overrides that inferiority complex entirely.
So synthesizing this, reading through these methods, it sounds identical to modern-day manifestation trends.
Oh, totally.
Or, the whole fake it till you make it mindset we see everywhere from corporate seminars to social media right now. Was Peale essentially acting as the original mass market life coach?
Pretty much. He was pioneering the idea that the individual has ultimate solitary control over their reality purely through mindset.
Okay.
By combining the unquestioned authority of mid-century religion with the practical step-by-step application of pop psychology, he made self-optimization accessible to the masses.
I have to push back on the methodology, though.
Wait for it.
Replacing a deep-seated fear with an affirmation, repeating a Bible verse 10 times a day, visualizing success. It sounds deceptively simple.
It does.
When you look at the complexities of, human trauma or severe clinical anxiety, just telling someone to forcefully overwrite their negative thoughts feels hollow. If someone is truly suffering, why would such a simplified, almost mechanical approach resonate with tens of millions of people?
That is the big question. And to understand why people were so desperate for that simplified fix, we really have to look at the psychological landscape of America at the time and the historical baggage that preceded it. Because Peale's philosophy didn't just drop out of the sky. It was a direct, visceral reaction to centuries of early American religious trauma.
Wait, religious trauma. So if people were drowning in anxiety, what was the source of it? Did it stem from something specific in the theology of that era?
It stemmed from what the sources called the Calvinist inheritance.
The Calvinist inheritance.
Yeah. If we look at early puritanical America, the dominant theology was Calvinism, which centered heavily on the doctrine of predestination.
Right, the idea that it's all decided beforehand.
Exactly. It's the terrifying concept that before you were even born, God had already decided if you were going to heaven or hell. Only a select, predetermined few were saved. The rest were damned, and there was absolutely nothing you could do through your own actions to change your status.
Try to imagine the mental toll of living under that system. You are constantly searching for proof of your own salvation.
True.
You're analyzing your neighbors, you're analyzing your children, you're obsessing over every minor mistake as potential evidence that you are, among the damned.
It created a socially enforced chronic anxiety. People lived in a state of terror and rigid self-monitoring.
Wow.
It resulted in severe, widespread religious depression. It was a theology built entirely on dread and human helplessness. But society eventually reached a breaking point.
Natural.
In the 1800s, a movement called New Thought emerged as a direct rebellion against this Calvinist panic.
Okay, I think the sources mentioned this. These were figures like Mary Baker Eddy and Phineas Quimby, who essentially offered a radical theological escape hatch, right?
Yes, exactly. They completely inverted the worldview. New Thought proposed that illness, struggle, and even the harsh material world itself were just temporary delusions of the human mind.
Oh, interesting.
They argued that the universe is not an angry judge, but a benevolent force, like a grantor of wishes, all connected by a perfect divine mind.
So Peale basically takes this 19th century New Thought concept, polishes it up, packages it with mainstream Protestant language, and delivers a cure for the morbidness of that old hellfire theology.
Spot on.
He tells a traumatized public, God isn't out to punish you. God is a partner who wants you to succeed in business and life.
And it was an incredibly liberating message. It offered a profound lifeline of inner peace to a generation that had just survived the economic devastation of the Great Depression, the horrors of World War II, and was now staring down the existential threat of the Cold War.
The sources point out a fascinating paradox here. By escaping the Calvinist dread, didn't positive thinking just replace an external, judgmental God with an internal one?
Oh, that is a great point.
Think about the mechanics of this for a second. It's like stepping off a torture rack and onto a hamster wheel. Under Calvinism, you feared an angry deity.
Mm.
Under positive thinking, you have to constantly micromanage your own thoughts. Every time you feel sad, or you lose your job, or you get sick, you are entirely to blame because your thinking wasn't positive enough. It creates a whole new kind of exhaustion.
It really does. That internal pressure is the defining feature of the philosophy. Positive thinking essentially splits you into two distinct people.
What do you mean?
Well, you have the broken self that needs to be managed, and the manager self that is doing the exhausting daily work of policing your thoughts. You are constantly monitoring your own mind, forcefully evicting any doubt.
It's easy to see how this constant striving for an optimized mindset impacts an individual in their living room.
Right.
But the sources show this philosophy didn't stay in the living room for very long. If you are preaching a doctrine where your success or failure is 100% up to your individual mindset, that is incredibly attractive to institutions.
Oh, absolutely.
Which explains how this leaped out of the church and straight into the office.
Yeah. Peale quickly realized that his message was highly marketable to the expanding post-war economy. As America entered a massive boom, the white-collar workforce exploded. And corporate America absolutely loved the underlying message of the power of positive thinking.
Because it is the ultimate productivity hack.
Exactly.
If an employee is unhappy, stressed, or struggling to make ends meet, the philosophy implies it's not the company's fault for overworking or underpaying them. It's the employee's fault for harboring an inferiority complex or dwelling on negative thoughts.
It shifts the burden of systemic issues entirely onto the individual's attitude.
Wow.
Peale aggressively marketed his philosophy to executives and salesmen. He even co-founded organizations to solidify this bridge between faith and business.
Like the Ratio Alger Association, right?
Yes. That group honors Americans who achieve massive success despite difficult circumstances, which reinforces the idea that mindset overcomes all obstacles. He also co-founded a group called 40+.
What was 40 plus?
It was an organization to help unemployed executives regain their confidence and re-enter the workforce. His philosophy essentially became the spiritual engine of American capitalism.
And that crossover appeal didn't stop at the boardroom doors. It went all the way to the White House.
It really did.
The political reach documented in these sources is staggering. Over the decades, Peale was admired by Presidents Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter, and George H.W. Bush. Ronald Reagan even awarded him the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1984.
And the historical record also extensively documents his profound connection to the Trump family. Looking at this impartially through the lens of our sources, Fred Trump, Donald Trump's father, was heavily influenced by Peale's teachings in the 1950s.
Really?
Yeah. The family regularly attended Peale's Marble Collegiate Church in Manhattan.
So Donald Trump grew up listening to Peale sermons in person.
He did.
Peale even officiated his first wedding.
Right. And if you analyze the methodology Donald Trump has utilized throughout his career in real estate, entertainment, and politics, it is the absolute embodiment of Peale's core teachings.
How so?
Well, remember the specific instruction we discussed earlier from the book. Visualize an image of yourself as successful and stamp it indelibly on your mind. Never let the idea of failure enter.
Yeah, you can see that exact mechanism at play. Bulldozing over negative press or objective setbacks by simply refusing to acknowledge them as negative.
Yeah.
Branding every endeavor, regardless of the metric, as a total and complete success.
It is the literal application of the actualized principle. When faced with an obstacle, you do not validate it by worrying about it. You confidently state your own reality, you project absolute certainty, and you expect the material world and the people in it to eventually fall in line with your unyielding mindset.
It's a fascinating evolution. A philosophy that was originally meant to cure an individual's quiet midnight anxiety and bring them a sense of peace suddenly becomes the ultimate psychological weapon for hyper-individualistic capitalism and fierce presidential campaigns.
That evolution happened because the philosophy inherently removes structural and systemic barriers from the equation.
Right, because everything is just mindset.
Exactly. If everything is purely a matter of mind over matter, then ambition has absolutely no limits. Furthermore, empathy for structural failure isn't required because failure is just a symptom of weak thinking.
Oh, that's dark.
Yeah. And that massive leap from finding personal inner peace to utilizing God as a practical tool for wealth and power is exactly what triggered an absolute avalanche of backlash.
Which brings us to the counterattack. Because the traditional guardians of both science and faith saw this happening, and they went on the offensive.
They certainly did.
If we look at the psychologists first, they weren't just skeptical. They thought Peale was actively dangerous.
The psychological critique was incredibly fierce. Albert Ellis, the renowned founder of cognitive therapy, warned that Peale's methods were dangerously close to hypnotism.
Hypnotism.
Yeah, Ellis argued that forcing yourself to believe intensely upbeat statements in the face of glaring contrary evidence causes a person to literally lose touch with reality.
I mean, that makes sense, because if you are just burying your genuine trauma or your actual physical exhaustion under a mountain of forced smiles and repeated Bible verses, you aren't healing the trauma. You are just making it much harder to access and treat.
And Ellis warned that in the long run, this suppression leads to profound psychological disillusionment. When the forced positivity inevitably fails to fix a real tragedy, the person crashes even harder.
Oh.
Furthermore, Martin Seligman, the founder of the positive psychology movement, which is a legitimate empirical branch of science, he drew a very sharp, hard line between his clinical work and Peale's pop philosophy.
Right. The sources highlight that Seligman stated true positive psychology is based on empirical accuracy and evidence. You look at what is actually working and build on it. Peale's positive thinking, on the other hand, demands absolute belief in the complete absence of evidence.
Seligman even warned that Peale's brand of ungrounded optimism could be fatal in the wrong circumstances.
He used a brilliant analogy for this.
Oh, the airplane one.
Yes. He compared it to a pilot who sees a red warning light flashing on the dashboard of their airplane, but chooses to ignore it because they refuse to entertain negative thoughts.
Right.
Sometimes, negative thinking, or critical, realistic anxiety, is a crucial survival tool. It tells you the engine is about to fail.
Exactly. The psychologist felt he was eroding critical thinking. But the theologians were arguably even more furious than the scientists.
Heavyweight theologians of the era like Reinhold Niebuhr and Liston Pope absolutely tore into him. They accused Peale of fundamentally corrupting the core tenets of Christianity.
They argued that Peale had entirely stripped God of sovereignty. In their view, he turned the divine into an impersonal mechanical device or a master psychiatrist that humans could manipulate to acquire wealth and status.
Niebuhr is basically saying Peale turned God into a cosmic slot machine.
Wait, that's exactly it.
Put in 10 repetitions of Philippians 4.13, pull the lever, and get a promotion at the bank. One of the sources quotes a theologian saying Peale created a cult of success. Instead of worshiping the divine, people were worshiping their own ambition, using religious language to justify greed.
Niebuhr pointed out that this philosophy helps people feel comfortable and wealthy while completely evading the real complex issues of human existence.
Like what?
While it conveniently ignores the realities of systemic injustice, inexplicable suffering, and the profound theological need for genuine grace in the face of failure.
And this backlash wasn't just confined to academic papers or seminary debates. It exploded into a massive, very public political controversy during the 1960 presidential election.
Oh, it was a huge scandal. In the fall of 1960, Peale stepped far outside his role as a self-help author. He served as the chairman for a prominent group of Protestant clergymen who released a manifesto publicly opposing John F. Kennedy's run for the presidency.
And their stated reason was specifically because Kennedy was a Roman Catholic.
Yes.
What was their actual argument? Because opposing a candidate solely on religion sounds incredibly extreme today.
Peale and the group declared that with the potential election of a Catholic, American culture and free speech were literally at stake. They suggested that Kennedy would be under the direct influence of the Vatican, serving the Pope's interests before the interests of the United States.
Wow. And the blowback to that manifesto was immediate, right? It was catastrophic for Peale's carefully cultivated public image.
It was devastating. He was widely accused of blind prejudice and bigotry. The backlash was so intense and universally negative that Peale actually went into hiding.
Into hiding, really?
Yes. He threatened to resign from his position at his church, and his weekly column was dropped by a dozen syndicated newspapers across the country.
It even prompted Adlai Stevenson, the prominent politician and diplomat, to deliver one of the most famous, stinging quips on the campaign trail. He told an audience, "I find St. Paul appealing and St. Peale appalling."
Such a devastating, unforgettable line.
It really is.
Peale later wrote that this scandal was one of the darkest, most difficult periods of his entire life. He claimed his intentions were misunderstood and quickly tried to distance himself from the group's manifesto.
But the damage was done.
Yeah, the damage to his reputation among the intelligentsia was permanent.
So synthesizing all of this, we have medical experts arguing his methods are essentially psychological fraud. We have the leading religious scholars calling him a heretic who turned God into a vending machine. We have his massive political maneuvers blowing up in his face in front of the whole country.
Yeah.
Despite all of that, ordinary people still bought 21 million copies of his book.
Yeah.
Why? If the experts hated it, why did it resonate so deeply with the public?
It's a profound question about human nature. I mean, it resonated because despite the theological flaws and psychological risks, it addressed a very real, very painful human need. Millions of people were suffering from crippling self-doubt, fear of the future, and emotional exhaustion. Peale offered a simple, actionable message of hope, empowerment, and agency. He looked at people who felt entirely invisible and powerless and told them they possessed immense, untapped power within their own minds.
For someone who is drowning in despair, the promise that they can seize control of their chaotic destiny simply by changing their thoughts is incredibly seductive. And frankly, for many people, the basic act of intentionally building self-confidence, setting goals, and reducing their chronic worry did yield positive results in their daily lives.
Which leaves us with this incredible, deeply complicated dual legacy. On one hand, Norman Vincent Peale undeniably provided a lifeline of hope and inner peace to millions of people who were suffering from paralyzing anxiety. He helped normalize the idea that we don't have to be passive victims of our own dark moods.
But on the other hand, he laid the absolute bedrock for a modern self-help industry that is frequently and rightfully accused of peddling toxic positivity.
Oh, for sure.
An industry that often ignores the complex, systemic realities of human suffering by telling vulnerable people that their poverty, their illness, or their clinical depression is simply the result of their own negative thinking.
It creates a culture where failure is always a personal moral failing, never a structural one.
Which brings us to a final thought we want to leave you with today. Something to really mull over long after this deep dive ends.
Yeah, think about this.
What are the broader societal consequences when an entire culture fully adopts a positive vibes-only mindset? If we train ourselves to firmly believe that all failure, all illness, and all financial hardship are purely the result of a bad mindset, do we ultimately lose our empathy for those who are genuinely struggling with circumstances completely outside of their control?
If the universe is perfectly responsive to our thoughts, then compassion for the marginalized becomes unnecessary because they supposedly chose their fate. We have to ask ourselves where the line is drawn between cultivating a healthy optimism and deliberately blinding ourselves to reality.
Treating the complexities of the human mind isn't like fixing a broken bone. The diagnostic landscape is murky, and the cures are rarely absolute. Peale tried to offer a clean, guaranteed formula for happiness. But as we've seen, when you try to force the messy, often painful realities of the human experience into a purely positive picture, sometimes the picture shatters.